So I read an article this morning. See, that officer was fired in New York City 5 years ago from the Garner case. I don't know how many of you know that. I wasn't there. I just read articles, but I think it's pretty interesting. Pretty much overall, Garner happens to be a black man, big guy, selling cigarettes, loose cigarettes out in front of a store. The store calls the police and says, hey, I don't like that guy doing that. I pay a fortune to stay in business, and he's out there cutting my business out. So the police respond, and Garner resists, and they get in a big struggle. And one of the officers, who happens to be a white guy, puts him in neck restraint. There's two types. There's an LVNR. That's when you put the throat into your elbow, which protects the trachea so you don't crush it and kill him. And there's an arm bar, which is a lethal, putting the bone of your arm against the larynx and crushing and killing people, right? So anyway, my understanding is they fight, Garner ends up dying. They do an investigation, and it has nothing to do with the neck restraint. He dies because he's heavy, he's out of shape, and if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, I think he had some controlled substance in his body. I don't know what that would have been. I don't know if it was marijuana or something else. I don't remember. Anyway, so they justified that everything happened. Well, they just fired that officer after 5 years. But what I think is really interesting is that the president of the union is now looking for a vote of no confidence against the mayor and the commissioner. And I think that that's great. I do. What's happening with law enforcement around the country is horrendous. It is. I'm sick of it, man. My son loves me. I was a law enforcement officer for 20 years, and I'm sure he'll probably want to do that when he grows up. And if things don't turn around, I wouldn't in a million years, if I had anything to do with it, let him go. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Because there's too many morons that are running things and making stupid decisions. I don't care if they've been there or not, they forget, they get up there. Now, how they justify that, I don't know. I'm sure there'll be more on it. But in the end, what I like is that at least somebody's doing something for the cops. I came from a great police department. I can't remember how many cops were on it when I got on there. I think there's 2,000 or 3,000 now. It's the 7th largest in the country, or at least it was. I don't know, numbers are fluctuating. But I got to tell you something. The sheriffs I worked for were awesome. They weren't all the same. Not all were as good as the other. But I can tell you what, they stood behind the cops. That's the way it was. And this may sound radical, but I can tell you how great it was to live in Las Vegas. As long as I was on the department for the 20 years I was there, and I'm sure probably more either way. Well, not either way. Cop killers never made it to prison. That's a fact. If you killed a cop in Las Vegas, you didn't get arrested. Now, it just played out that way. Not that they were mad, crazy hunters, but I'll tell you what, we didn't do that. It's interesting. When I was in SWAT, and there was a young guy, happened to be a black kid, and some officers got a call that he had a gun, and he was at a bus stop, and they stepped out of the patrol car, and that kid had a gun in his pocket, and the officer should have told him, turn around, take your hands out of your pockets. Instead he said, take your hands out of your pockets. He pulled a gun out, shot at the officers. I can't remember if he struck the officer or not. No, I know no officers were killed. And then he barricaded into an apartment, right? And so we surround him. And my partner and I were across the way. And what was really interesting about that call out was he shot a lot through the windows and the walls and the doors. We ended up going in there. The entry guys went in there. And he ended up killing himself. But at the end, we always debrief at the end of a SWAT call out. Constructive criticism, people learn from mistakes. But the intelligence guys, right, they had some great stuff for us. And that guy, that young guy, had a cousin that was some rapper. I don't know rappers. But he was making a phone call on his cell phone, and the intelligence guys were picking it up. And this guy who ended up killing himself, who was shooting at us, told his rapper, cousin or whatever, in California, hey, you know what, I'm here in Las Vegas, and I'm the cops, and blah, 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 blah. And forgive my language, but the rapper said, motherfucker, they're going to kill you. You ain't in L.A. people may think that cops shouldn't be rough and tough, but what in the hell do you think law enforcement's there for? You know, cops, they're not all the same. They're not not all gunfighters. They're not all super jujitsu people. You know, there's investigators. There's all sorts of police officers. But the bottom line is, what do you think law enforcement officers are there for? They're there to handle things you can't, or you're afraid of. So, and then people want to make a decision on how they do it. You know, what I think is really interesting is people that call cops because someone in their family is out of control. I want to tell you something right now. If you do that, you might get somebody in your family killed. That's a fact. And I'm not talking bad about the cops. What do you think a cop thinks when they're on a call, when a family member is calling saying that I've got somebody in my family, so that officer right away, they have a little bit of common sense. Oh, I think the president's having somebody come pick me up. They need me back right now. Sorry, Mr. President, I'm doing a video. Anyway, this Chinook's gonna fly over. Make a little bit of noise. Totally awesome. Anyway, I lost train of thought. I know, it's up there, you're missing it. Totally cool. Look out the back window, you'll see it. There it goes. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. But, you know, cops dealing with violence, maybe I'll pick it back up, but cops deal with violence every day. That's what they do. I mean, maybe they'll have a day where there's no violence, but pretty much it's about violence. There we go. If you call a law enforcement officer and you tell them, hey, there's somebody in my family, they're totally crazy, right away they're going to use their common sense to go, wow, if a family member's afraid, this could be a big deal. So understand that if you call a law enforcement officer on your family for acting crazy or threatening or something like that, it could go away that you don't think it's going to. You know, I just had a conversation with somebody. He's a soldier, and of course I was a policeman, and I talked about how I had contemplated, almost went into the military, and in the end God directed me another way and I became a policeman. But you know, I think there's two core differences between soldiers and policemen. I think they have a lot in common. But I think soldiers are trained to kill the enemy and policemen are trained to save people's lives. I mean, even when I responded as a SWAT sniper or an entryman and went in and we were, you know, guns and ready to shoot, we still gave people the chance to survive. And that's what law enforcement officers do. But the idea to think that they need to risk everything, risk their life every single day by, you know, I just read another article this morning about some city councilman. Okay, lady, you're out of here to keep that up. Some city council person in Vermont, some small city in Vermont, wants to take guns away from the cops because they think that escalates situations. I mean, how can you imagine that? Yeah, you take guns away from cops in America and let's see what escalates. And it ain't gonna be peace, let me tell you. You know, violence is the great de-escalator. That's the bottom line. Violence or the threat of it. Why do people pay for their tickets? Why do people stop when they get pulled over? Why do people pay their fines? Because in the end, if you don't do those things, law enforcement officers are going to end up utilizing violence to put you in jail because that's their job. That's the reality of things. Speaking of that, you know, I've seen a lot of anti-cop sentiment on my page. I suggest that you don't comment like that anymore. I know you like my page. You should. I've been giving it out for 5 years for free, never asked for anything. And I give tips on how to survive that I learned over 20 years of law enforcement and the 10 years since, and I do it for free. But if you don't support the cops, I'm afraid I don't support you. I want to end with this. When I wore a uniform and a badge, I recognized that I was representing my community. When I would respond on a call, I would tell somebody who was angry, loud, yelling, violent, whatever, that I didn't care what they thought of me, but I will not let them disparage my badge or my uniform. That's how police officers feel. They represent the community. They're there to save. They're there to protect even the one that's out of line. It's the truth. But if somebody gets too out of line or is foolish or wants to die or wants to try and hurt or kill a police officer, they may end up dead. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that. There's a whole lot of people out there. I've known a lot of monsters that will never be good for society. And they shouldn't be around. I'm all for the cops. The president of the union in New York. Man, I love it. That's awesome. Because cops' hands are getting tied everywhere. De-escalation. Look at this Newsom guy in California just wrote a new bill changing from reasonable for an officer to act reasonably to defend themselves to in defense of their life. It's always been defense of your life, but now they're using semantics, and that's scary. This Governor Newsom, that guy, oh my gosh. I ought to move to California and run against him. This guy's a clown. Has no idea of reality. Plays games like that to get votes. We need to stop dealing with that. That's why I like what's happening in New York. It needs to happen all around the country. You know what, man? I support the cops, and you should too. And cops, you better know that your community does support you. So don't forget that when you respond somewhere. I know sometimes it's the us and them thing. And that, most people in the general public that don't know law enforcement don't understand the us and them. But that's because when you arrive on a scene and it's chaotic, the us and them comes from the fact that at least if someone's in uniform, I know that they'll save and protect my life. I don't know the other people there, even though the vast majority probably would protect me and help me. You don't know that. But once an officer gets away from a scene like that, you need to remember that your community does support you. You know, God blessed me in many ways, but I remember young in my career, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to end because I'm going past my 10 minutes, but I'll never forget, I'll end with this. Early in my career, about 3 years on, I was in my patrol car, and I stopped at an intersection in Las Vegas, Jones and Charleston, and there were cars all around me. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about us and them. And that's when, through God's great wisdom, He put it in my head to say, listen, if it was you against everybody out there, look at, you're surrounded. So all you who wear a uniform, you got to remember that the community does support you. And that it's important, and I'm not saying you don't, but it's important that you remember that. You know, the biggest thing I regret out of my police career was not recognizing how important it was to build, you know, the relationship with the community. I did it a lot, but not enough. I didn't follow up on enough cases. I just did what I did and went to the next thing, and then I got into specialized units where we really didn't deal with victims a lot. We just like bashed in doors and saved lives and went to the next thing, you know. But I have nothing but respect for the cops. And I'm tired of everybody, every time you got to say that, you got to justify, I know not all cops are perfect. That's nonsense. Nobody's perfect in any profession, so I'm not even going to say that anymore. I'm all for the cops, man. Thanks so much for sticking up for the guys in New York. I'm going to be watching that story, and I'm going to keep commenting on it. Let me know what you think about it. Hey, if you like our videos, I don't know, at least I moved the camera around so you see a pretty country. You don't got to look at an ugly guy like me. Don't forget to share us. Put it out and around. We're going to start doing some cool shooting stuff, man. We got some really cool, I set up a new range over here. And maybe I'll shoot a video today, share it with everybody. God loves you. Keep safe.